Right, welcome everyone. It is 6 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We may have some people join us in the next minute or two, but I'm going to go ahead and move things forward. But welcome everyone. My name is Ann Klein. I'm with Purdue Extension. I am the Ag and Natural Resources Educator in Noble County. Some of you are in Noble County, but I think we have a smattering of people across the state. So thanks for joining us today. I hope your course is going well. And I guess the next thing I thought we would do, some of us were in the first session together, but some of us weren't. So I was going to have us just walk through and if you just give us your name, maybe which county or municipality you belong to, and then your role or why you're interested in planning. If you could do that. I'm going to start with Teresa, if you'd go first, and then I'll have Earl, and then after that I will have Steve. Okay.
I'm Teresa Tackett. I'm with Noble County Plan Commission in the Planning Department, Plan Director there. Fairly new, but I've actually really enjoyed the course. I've been slacking a little bit, but I'm getting there. I'm almost done. Had a couple family things that came up. But I like the fact that it's a little bit flexible like that. A lot of good things. And I keep thinking of things, oh, I can bring this into my board. So they may get some copies of some of the stuff that we've gone through over the last few sessions. So thanks for putting us all together, Ann. So really appreciate it.
Thank you, Teresa. Earl?
I'm Earl Bolander. I'm with the town of Fort Bill. I actually am on the zoning board, the BZA. And I was with Ann on the first session, so enjoying the course, got the course done, just have to do the final exam.
All right, Steve.
Steve Cole, I'm with the Rome City Commission. New to it, started in February.
Okay, thank you, Steve. You cut in and out just a little bit, but I think I got most of it. So let's see. We'll go next with I'm guessing it's Jeff Cunningham that's on, and then Peter Gray, and then Kay Morris. If you guys would want to introduce yourselves.
Correct, Ann. This is Jeff Cunningham. I'm on the Noble County Plan Commission as a director. Been on it for about 4 months.
All right, Peter.
This is Peter Gray. I'm the city controller for the city of West Lafayette. Just trying to learn more about the process so we can help the APC as well as the city navigate these things.
Excellent, Peter. Kay Morris.
My name is Kelly Morris, and I'm on the BZA and Plan Commission, both in Rome City, and have been for probably since 1994. I am completely done with the course and tried to take the final exam, but it wouldn't let me. So that's where I'm at.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Easter, and then we'll do Leanne, and then Andre.
Good evening. This is Erin Easter with the City of West Lafayette. I'm the Director of Development.
Excellent. Leanne?
Okay, I found the unmute button. I'm Lee Pranger. I'm the town manager for the town of Rome City, which means I do also the planning zoning. I am on, I think, section 11 in the class, and I, like Teresa, found it interesting. There's a lot of review, but a little bit of it's new, so some of it I'll probably bring to my board also. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. Andre.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andre Maui. Sorry, I was just a little bit late there with back-to-back meetings going tonight. I am on the Plan Commission in Westfield, and I was with Ann for the first session, and at that time I had completed, I think, a little bit less than half of the coursework online. I was slightly behind where I was supposed to be. I'm still in the same spot, so now I'm even farther behind because I probably should be done by now.
Thank you for joining us, Andre. Did anyone join us that I didn't notice? I think I've got everybody that's on. Anyone else? All right. I would like to thank Brandy Anderson for popping in. She's here in case I have technical difficulties. I'm off. Thank you, Brandy, for joining us tonight and taking over should something happen. And then we have Kara Salazar and Bob Thompson, who are our speakers for tonight. So we'll just move directly into that. And Kara, if you want to go ahead, Kara, it works for Purdue University as well as she's on the Sea Grant. And I'm going to just let her go ahead and explain her role and what that means.
Hi, everyone. I'll go ahead and start sharing my slides. And so let's see, just a moment. I'm happy to be with you tonight. All right, I'll get my presentation going and then I can start speaking here. Great. Hopefully you can see the slide okay. Does it look good? Okay, excellent. Thanks so much. So yeah, hi, I'm Kara Salazar. I'm an assistant program leader and extension specialist for sustainable communities. I'm more with Purdue Extension and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. I wear a few hats. The work that I do focuses on environmental planning, community engagement, and community development. So I work throughout the state of Indiana. I also work within the North Central region of the US and within the Great Lakes as well with my affiliation with Sea Grant. So Sea Grant is similar to the land grant extension effort, but we are funded through NOAA and we focus on water resources and coastal communities, including the Great Lakes. So that's where we are with Indiana and the Great Lakes system. So I'm also on a few different land use planning groups. I'm affiliated with the Purdue land use team, and I'm with the National Community of Practice that created the Citizen Planner effort. So we had a great mechanism to bring this here to Indiana, and I'm really excited that we are able to do so and that we're all participating tonight with it. We've already done our name affiliations, but what I'm going to skip to is some shared expectations. So we do have a little bit of interaction in this next slide set that we're going to look through, focusing on equity and inclusion in planning. So when we're participating on in this session in particular, here are some shared expectations that we'll want to think of and keep in mind, mostly so that we can have an inclusive discussion and participating fully as well. So if folks have any other thoughts or things that they'd like to add to this, please go ahead and add it in the chat, or you can certainly unmute and let me know. And I'll give you a minute to look through that. Okay, we will go ahead and move forward here. So we're going to discuss our discussion in inclusion in planning and equity in planning by looking at and thinking through the diversity wheel. And I'd like to mention too that a lot of the content within this presentation was inspired by the Color of Law book, and you should have received a guide, or not a guide, but a resource list of several different readings and other types of resources and links. And this book is on it. The short 17-minute video too is also related to that book. So Color of Law, Richard Rothstein. And we have pulled out some of the concepts and resources from that book and that video to model within this presentation. And so we wanted to start thinking through diversity, equity, inclusion, and planning by introducing the diversity wheel. And for those of you who may be new to this, this is something that has 3 different dimensions to it. Often when you're thinking about diversity, you're thinking about the characteristics that are within the primary dimensions. So these are things like age, race, gender, physical ability, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Excuse me. And so these are often in organizational and governmental definitions of diversity too. These can also be more easily seen or noticed, and we don't usually have control over them. However, as we move out into the secondary dimension, these are things that we do tend to have more control over, although we're not always and often change throughout our life. So this is something that will stay a little bit more constant. And then the organizational dimensions on the last part of the ring is how we fit within our own organization or business culture. So if you've ever changed jobs or joined a new organization, you can notice how different organizational cultures can be. And so when I'm looking through these organizational and it's all of these different types of dimensions, where we can think about how it can be applied to our communities and our work in planning. And so, for example, think about who holds power and leadership positions in the community. That could be something like management status or how long someone has lived in the community can be comparable to seniority. So each of us have an answer in how we identify within these three different dimensions. So we have race, we have an income bracket, and how we answer these things are part of our culture. It affects how we see and interact with our world and how others perceive us. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes, I'll give you a moment to read through this too. And if you can place in the chat the link to the diversity wheel so that if people would like to look at it a little closer, what we're going to consider is we're going to have people think about this about 30 seconds. Think about this silently on your own. Provide your own example. So where do you feel you fit within this diversity wheel? And do that on your own. So now what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you get into a breakout room and you'll be with one other person. And what we'd like for you to talk about and share is how the different dimensions of the diversity wheel impact public engagement in land use planning. So for example, in the primary dimension, how may race, gender, or other things affect public engagement in land use planning? In the secondary dimension, how may parental status, religion, recreational habits impact planning, public engagement or land use planning? In the organizational dimensions, think about how some of those aspects, seniority, for like we mentioned earlier, how long you've been in a community, how might those things impact public engagement and land use planning? So you'll be paired with one other person. Take a little bit of time to talk through that and use your own communities or other experiences to share. And then we'll come back and ask for a couple of people to share what they've spoken about. And you will have a link to the diversity wheel in chat so that you will be able to reference that while you're having your conversation. So we'll give you just about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll bring you back from the breakout rooms.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start those breakout rooms. Just so you know, one of your groups may have 3 in it. So I'm going to open those rooms and we'll see you back here. Okay, Kara, I think everybody's in, so.
There we go. Sorry, great. Sorry, my mute button was covered there.
I was making sure that everyone joined. Just thought I could throw you in if we needed to, but I went ahead and put Brandy and Bob together. Just thought, well, they can talk. This is okay for them to talk about too.
Yeah, it's definitely, it provides some different perspectives.
Yeah. How many of these have you done this spring, summer?
You know, this is the only one I've done. So Dan was, on paternity leave. So he's been doing, I do I do present and I am available to present. I many times am doing more of the administrative work on it too. So this year especially, I have a few other projects that I'm working on. So I've reduced my presentation load, but I love doing it. It's fun.
You know, and doing it through Zoom has really opened up a whole new way of doing it as well.
Yeah, there are definitely pros and cons. It's nice because there's flexibility. You can get people together more easily. And the con is you lose some of those interactions, but
Definitely. Give them about 3 more minutes, I think. Do you want to be able to jump in and out to hear what they're saying, or just let them
no,
go?
it's okay. We can just let them go and
Okay.
keep it kind of, some people feel more comfortable than others talking about this. So it's a pretty low stress way to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. So it hopefully will be okay there, but we didn't want to put too many people on the spot.
Yeah, it's probably better one-on-one. I may go ahead and give them their minute warning.
Yeah,
here.
sounds good. Yeah, they don't need a lot of time. So. All right, I think we have everyone back, Kara. Great. Excellent. Just covering that. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for participating in that short activity. If we could have a couple of people who might be willing to share, you can go ahead and unmute and provide a couple of examples.
I can jump in there. That's a short period of time for such a complex topic, for sure. You know, there were some things that Lee and I looked at this diversity wheel and we couldn't figure out, how does that really have an impact on planning? And maybe some of them just don't, or they shouldn't. And then other things that was more clear. Age stood out as one from the primary dimensions that really does impact a person's perspective on planning, you know, kind of their status in life, which bleeds very quickly over into the secondary dimension, you know, marital status and parental recreational habits. Are we looking for open space for kids to run around? Are we looking for walkable, you know, coffee shop type spaces, right? So these things really do start to play into what people are looking for. And we didn't get this far, but we kind of started talking about, and I guess would be for housing, you got the empty nesters all the way to the up and coming professionals. You know, you got a lot of things to balance there. So I could ramble. Like I said, this is a big topic, but those are some highlights we touched on.
Thank you so much. Would another group like to share?
I'll agree. We had a little technical issue, so we were really packed in for time, but we noticed that income, need for housing, sometimes development is happening in the wrong areas. Parking sometimes is an issue for things like that. Yeah, again, we were kind of short on time, but in both brackets, within the three of us, you could see different areas that the need for income, or the bigger the income, the better. It seems to have more development in those areas.
Thank you. We have time for one more group to share if they'd like to. All right, well, we can also move on. So thank you again for taking the time to participate too. This is something that, as we're starting to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects of planning, that it's helpful to have somewhat of a baseline and some common ground as you're working together and thinking together in some of these different aspects that we're going to cover. And it also is a nice segue into some of the perspectives that we're now going to talk about, going from a historical perspective up until present day. And so you can see just from looking at your own perspectives and the different dimensions, how complex this really is and how intertwined it is within our communities and with our society. So going to move on now into, we're going to have a little bit of discussion time based on a historical perspective of policy impacts. And we're going to do this through examining, two Muncie neighborhoods and the legacy of the Federal Housing Administration policy. We'll look too at how historical zoning as a tool has been used as a tool of segregation and how those impacts are still with us, and take a wider look at land use transportation in Indianapolis. All right. And so I have a little bit of a lag, sorry. To get started here, we'll look at this document, which this is a historical manual now, but it contains the instructions, policies, and regulations governing the work of the Federal Housing Administration underwriting task. And what this did was determine eligibility of non-farm mortgages for insurance. And this determination was made by ascribing risk. So they looked at ratings as for the applicant as compared to value rating of the property. This is from 1938. And so there are the policies of racial discrimination that are underlying throughout this document. And so we'll highlight some of these things here. From some of the statements, determine whether or not incompatible racial and social groups are present to determine these value rankings, and the probability of location being invaded by groups. Also, a change in social or racial occupancy can lead to general instability and a reduction in values. And that once the character of a neighborhood has been established, it's usually impossible to induce a higher social class. So this is something that has very long-term implications. And so to combat this, they say, the best artificial mean of providing protection from adverse influences is through the medium of appropriate and well-drawn zoning. Zoning receives the backing of public approval, an excellent basis for protection against adverse influences. And then deed restrictions are also used. So that sets up the basis of what we're going to see here and how this has played out and been applied. This is, we're going to look at a miniature case study here in Muncie and show some examples of how this looks. This is a map here of the Homeowners Loan Corporation. HOLC is the acronym that's frequently used. And this was the federal New Deal program that made home loans for families across the country. And the corporation used residential security maps. And this is like the one shown of Muncie to provide guidance for underwriters making loans. And so areas with low ratings would not be supported from the program and were placed at a disadvantage. The colors here represent a gradient of desirability and also risk. As shown earlier, desirability ratings factored on race, income, and risk of invasion of incompatible races and classes. So the areas that are in red were the least desirable in 1933. And this map has been stretched so that it matches the river streets and rail lines. Keep your focus on the locations highlighted, by the blue arrows. You'll see areas D2 and D5 are highlighted, And those were 75 to 85% African American, with incomes between $720 to $1,000 at the time. Detrimental influences included nearby industry, many relief families, no flush toilets, crowded homes, and commentary on infrastructure. There were only 2 paved streets, and these were only 2 districts of the 7 fourth grade districts with significant percentage of African Americans. D4 mentions detrimental influences of being strictly with immigrants. And so discrimination was based not only on race, but also immigrant status too. And so we'll particularly look at this area that's circled in red too. This is a map now showing the distribution of people in Muncie by race. It's matched to the same dimensions from the previous map that you saw. And there's been little change in almost 100 years between the D2 and D5 areas that are pointed to in blue. And this is supported by the findings of a 2018 study that found that 74% of redlined areas are low moderate income today, and 64% are still minority. We also can look at vacancy, and it seems to be concentrated within this area provided by Delaware County. This is data from Delaware County. We see orange and green parcels highlighted as vacant and concentrations in the D2 and D5 neighborhoods as well. And then you can see that from the area within this circle here. So this has lasting impact on property values, infrastructure investments, and generational wealth. We then can look a little bit more within this context of Indianapolis, and there are several maps that were digitizing the HOLC district boundaries over present day Indianapolis. And this also has environmental data, transportation, and infrastructure data. And if you were able to watch the video, you knew that many interstates were built in low income, high minority neighborhoods. These neighborhoods shown here are no exception. There are high concentrations of Superfund sites, brownfields, and other industrial sites. Although it's hard to say which came first, the older areas of town were the sites of industry before the environmental regulations were brought later in the 1900s. These highways were planned and completed in the 50s and 60s after some of the FHA's policies had been in place for about 20 or so years. So as we reflect on the maps and some of the data that you were just presented with, and hopefully you're able to watch the segregated by design video, are there some things that you learned that surprised you? And some follow-up questions of should we have known this history and why don't we? Also, what information applies to your own community or neighboring communities? So I'd like to open it up a little bit for discussion for a few minutes, and you can also put some things into chat. We'll monitor the chat. So let's start with the first question and those sub-questions. What did you learn that surprised you?
I was surprised to see that the change between the areas that were predominantly Black versus white really didn't change that much over time. That was quite a surprise to me.
Any other thoughts?
I agree. Actually, it's sad that hasn't changed at all in the last 100 years. That doesn't reflect the world that we've got in the 21st century, in my opinion.
Thank you for those thoughts. Think a little bit more to, oh, go ahead. Is there someone?
Yeah, no, this is Erin. I'll share a little story from our own community. I had worked with our former Dean of Students, Betty Nelson, for a number of years on some initiatives within our community. And she shared that she was helping a friend of hers who was going to stay in a assisted living facility. And she was helping her sell her home on the far kind of western boundary then of our city. And as she was going through the deed documents from when they had purchased the house, probably 40 to 60 years prior to that, there were still deed restrictions for members of the Jewish faith and the Black community. And we saw a lot of that in some of our peripheral neighborhoods, forcing that concentration into our New Chauncey neighborhood. Historically, as we track that data. So just an interesting aside, you'll never know when you'll find one of these items. It is often buried deep in some of the deed restrictions on existing deeds.
Thank you very much for sharing that information too. Do others have other community applications or stories to share as well?
I've actually come across some similar things in my department. We have seen some very old plats that were restrictive to who could live there. We don't enforce it, never would, but it was a shock to see it.
Any other ideas? Well, thank you for those examples. Those are really powerful and very much highlights that we still certainly have work to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and things that have been in our history that are continually popping up that may be surprising or hidden to many of us too. What we're going to jump into now, we're going to transition a little bit and talk about inclusion in planning. And this is something that as planners and people working in planning, that you certainly have present within many aspects of your work and engaging people in different ways. So we're going to talk a little bit more about public participation and inclusion. And so what we're meaning here with inclusion is related to a broad range of methods through which people of the public can become more informed about or influence public decisions. And so we want to focus on supporting good public involvement and how local officials use public involvement practices to help inform residents, but also in turn to help them guide policy decisions and actions of local government. Excuse me, I am getting over a cold. When we're thinking about inclusion and public participation and public involvement, we can use this, this spectrum of participation of inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. This is coming from the International Association for Public Participation, and it has an increasing level of participation. I'm going to move into a larger slide here too, so we can talk a little bit more about this. And if you're familiar with the classic work of Arnstein and public participation, this is very much based on this level, these levels of participation as well. Again, I said this is coming from the International Association for Public Participation. You can link to their information here. There are a lot of really interesting tools and resources. This is a guide to think about as you're working in public participation and inclusion. And what I like about this one is that it has it divided between the public participation goal and what that means as what they call a promise to the public. And as we go from this, the lowest level of inform to the highest level of participation as empower, when we're thinking about informing, we're providing the public with balanced and objective information so that they can understand the problems and solutions. And so this is more of an information sharing. But again, there are some, what's I think important about each of these are there are some important practices and ways to stay inclusive while you're moving into different levels of participation. As you move into the consult aspect of the spectrum, you are asking for more feedback. So this could look more like surveys or public meetings too, where then as in the planning role, you're acknowledging what people are telling you, and you're providing feedback on how the public input influenced a decision. Through Involve, you're working directly with the public throughout the process. And then we're also thinking through how the concerns and aspirations are influenced within the decision making. Collaborate and Empower, at the top of the list here, is where you're forming more of a true partnership. So you're delegating responsibility to different stakeholder groups, to different working groups, to look for advice and to formulate solutions. And within the ultimate aspect of this with Empower, then implementing what is decided within that. So there is truly no one size fits all, and many of these aspects of the spectrum are going to be used throughout a planning process. But keeping this in mind as we're thinking about inclusion is important, so we can truly see where we are asking people to participate and what that looks like and what that means. And as you're thinking about inclusive planning practices, we have a few suggestions and practices to think about. And we're going to focus on these kind of one at a time. Ultimately, it's coming back to tailoring a process to your community and the demographics, and reaching out to the broad spectrum of your community as well. So we're going to talk about a little bit of just scratching the surface and affordable housing, public engagement, economic development, healthy and affordable lifestyles, and zoning. And then we'll want to have some time for discussion at the end, so you can provide your own examples and share how you've worked in these different ways within your communities as well. And so the first of these ideas is ensuring the development of affordable housing. So some of the strategies listed here include accessory dwelling permits for multi-generational housing, preserving existing homes to maintain quality and supply of affordable homes, and making sure homes exist across all price points. We're looking in particular focus for low and middle incomes. And we know that with fewer federal and state resources available for low income housing, local governments are stepping up and collaborating more in projects. And so it'll be interesting to hear more about what folks are doing as we're getting into the discussion time too. On the genuine public engagement aspect of inclusion, thinking through meeting space for everyone to contribute starts with inclusive meeting strategies. And so this is thinking through time of day. Many of you are doing these things already. Location, going to where people are. So perhaps you're going to meetings where people are already gathering. You have childcare available. If you could provide meals or other types of support. Translation services, thinking too about safe spaces and where people feel welcome and accessible are also important. So there are many different considerations here too. How are you also going to bring in new voices? If you have the same people who continue to come who are continually engaged, how are you bringing in other perspectives? So some of those things you might need to have different types of pop-up stands. So have something at a gathering place where people are attending a sport event, or for youth, or going to farmers market, and having some quick and easy ways for people to be engaged as well. And having some invitations too also helps. We'll also think about supporting economic development for jobs that pay a living wage. So that's something that's coming out more and more in the news as well. Thinking about income and class disparities in communities. Thinking through what that means for crime, social services, and working through economic development aspects with entrepreneurship too, and aligning economic growth and economic opportunity. Thinking also about supporting healthy and affordable lifestyles. So this can look like things such as complete streets. So these are the multimodal transportation aspects, where you have accessibility for walking, biking, and other types of transportation to have accessibility throughout your community, and developing trail systems and parks so that people can have access throughout the community as well. And zoning, density, and property tax. We'll talk a little bit more about this later too in another presentation. But how you can incentivize developments for some of these accessibility aspects too, with being walkable and locating sidewalks where they were previously absent, and looking at those neighborhoods that may have been had less investment, particularly thinking about the previous part of the presentation, thinking about infrastructure in areas that's where it's needed. And of course, these other aspects are linked to that as well. And so thinking through some of these strategies and ideas for inclusive planning practices, would like to open it up now more for conversation. And this is linking back to the diversity wheel conversation that we had in those different elements and dimensions. And the question to pose here is, how could we change policies to be more inclusive? And again, reference you back to some of the examples and issues shared previously. And you can certainly use chat, or we can open it up for discussion too. Based on some of the strategies that were presented in those slides earlier here, do you have some examples of how you have worked to have inclusive planning within, either through process or through things that you've implemented through public engagement or through some implementation?
A key bullet point there is the development of affordable housing. That's something that we in this area have to really challenge people to remember that it's necessary. You know, we get a lot of feedback wanting a certain minimum AV and things like that. And we're saying, hey, look, we're building up employment corridors that provide opportunities and then need to be supported by the workforce that has the affordable housing and everything. It's a balance that we talk about a lot.
Absolutely. Are there some strategies that you found that have been helpful?
So the comp plan that we're working from actually does a pretty good job of this. It's that, you know, the comp plan gives you the guardrails, but then the implementation of it becomes a little bit subjective, and you know, there's always going to be a certain group of people who want to tilt it one direction or the other. So it's kind of on a case by case where we, as developments are petitioned, have to take a look and listen to everybody's interests and concerns and try to figure out what makes the most sense for the area. And I mean, that's what we do, right? That's what we're all, anybody who's part of the planning commission, any of the organizations or the towns that I heard listed earlier during intros, that's what we all do. But it's just, it's finding that balance that it's all ranges of socioeconomic status can be welcomed into the community.
I'm interested to hear more too from folks on the call about public engagement. How do you use public engagement in your planning processes, and do folks have some examples to share of how they've been working to be inclusive in that process too?
A fairly large project coming up in Noble County, and we've struggled with getting public engagement. For us here lately, we have found a couple of people that were passionate on one side or the other. So they've actually been a key factor in getting some public engagement started and moving forward. And from there, we've succumbed to having to go to social media. And we'll see. I mean, the newspaper's out there, but I don't think a lot of the younger generation get the newspaper. I know my kids don't. So it's difficult. And I would like to hear if anybody has found that golden nugget that can help us find out how we can get better public engagement, because this big project that we have going on, we really would like to have more involvement than we're getting.
Other thoughts from the team here? Anyone had some good public engagement examples that they've worked on?
You know, I wish there was the magic wand for this one, right? How to get everybody involved and up front instead of after the fact when it's time for them just to complain about what already happened. But one thing, I'm always amazed at how often somebody comes to a public hearing because they saw the sign, you know, the what's happening here sign of all of the different ways to communicate. Just those signs sometimes are the thing that grab people more than anything else.
Thanks for that. And Leanne, you're have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that our community is kind of way ahead of the game. Back in 1974, 70, they did a Fair Housing Act, brought in a low-income apartments for low-income people and then low-income for elderly. So, I mean, we're a community of, 1,600, 1,700 people, and they did that way back in the 70s. So, I mean, I consider our town to be pretty inclusive. I don't
Thanks
know if
for that
anybody
example.
heard that or not.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I'll add one more thought from the Noble County perspective, and we're not the municipalities that I work with. One of the new groups that are increasing in number in our area are the Amish, and trying to include them is a whole different ball game. And you kind of have to think outside the box. And do we
They
want
don't want to be included?
Yeah, and you're right, to a certain extent, do they want to be included? But I think that's one challenge we have.
Great, thank you. And are there any other examples that people would like to share about policies that they might be working on now to make their communities more inclusive or their planning processes?
We're getting ready to do a comp plan amendment. And so we were talking at our meeting last night about bringing in a consultant again for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is that if we self-lead this, there's going to be some inherent, I don't know if they're biases or just oversights, but things that we may not be as objective as if we could bring in a third party who could facilitate the process and collect better input from the overall community.
So thank you for sharing that too. So are there any others working in something like that too? Are you tending to do more work when you're thinking about some of these inclusive practices and working with the public? I'm curious to know how much communities who are on the call here are doing themselves versus bringing in others to support that work, like a consultant or another party. Anybody doing it on their own?
We are working on a project pretty much on our own, but I will push for a consultant once we get closer to that final end result to make sure that we do, like Andre said, having another perspective besides our little area here. I think that's actually very smart.
I'm watching the time too. I think we actually we're ahead of time overall, but for my presentation time, I'm pretty much right on time. So I'll just keep moving forward so that we can stay on time too, in case there's some more discussion as we're getting into Bob's presentation. But I wanted to call out some additional resources. So the racial dot map from the University of Virginia that was used with some of the mapping activities that you saw. Purdue has a digital divide index from our Purdue Center for Regional Development, so that can be interesting. It shows Adams County there, but this is for the entire state. And so that'll be interesting to look at some of those indices. And as I mentioned earlier, you had a list of podcasts, videos, and articles that are affiliated with this presentation that were sent to you. I don't know if you can see me. No, my video screen's not going to help, but The Color of Law book is listed on that by Richard Rothstein. Great book, but there are short articles within the list of resources that were sent. So there's a really nice couple-page article based on that. And then, of course, the video was based on the book, too. So you have a few other things that you can dig into when you have some time and opportunity to read some more. So thank you very much for all of the interaction and the conversation. That was really fun to be able to work with you on that. And so I'll turn it over to Anne, and we will transition into the next section too.
Thank you, Kara. I appreciate you doing that for us. So our next session is more of a panel speaker. We're going to have two speakers. One is Bob Thompson, and the other will be Kara again. Our topics are renewable energy and then natural resources and planning. And I've asked them both to talk a little bit if they have any comments on public engagement, how to engage the public. So maybe we'll hear a little more from Bob on that, or you can pick his brain afterwards. So we're going to give them some time to just introduce their subjects, and then the rest of the time is there for you guys to ask questions. So as they're talking, jot down those questions you might have. That's kind of the point here, is to be open with them and be able to engage with them. So without further ado, I will introduce Bob Thompson. He is from Porter County, and he is the director, and I will let him just take it from there. Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Where is my slide presentation? Is it up?
I'm not seeing it yet.
Now I might have shut it down. It did get shut down. Hold on.
That's all right.
A second. Apologize for that. I guess real quickly, I am the Director, Department of Development and Stormwater Management here. The department oversees all of the engineering that goes on in the unincorporated areas of Porter County, and also the planning, the building. We have GIS up here. So, I mean, it's about 8 years ago, I was just the director of the Plan Commission. I had just 5 employees up here. We're over 20 now. So let me try it now. There it is.
Yes, I'm seeing your presentation. If you want to go ahead and share it. Perfect. It looks good, Bob. Thank you.
All right. Real quickly, I guess renewable energy ordinances. Porter County has a wind energy and also a solar energy ordinance in place. How did those come about? We've got to be honest. They were a reaction to potential developments that were coming in. Around 2010, we had a company that was looking at the southern part of the county in LaPorte County and Porter County, between Couts and the town of La Crosse in LaPorte County, at building a wind farm. And we had nothing to manage this or an approval process or anything on that. Would have been if anything, is send them in front of the BZA for use variance or something, which really is not appropriate. So from this, we broke down and I started researching on wind energy conversion systems and how we go about doing that. And instead of just doing it for large, we did it for small, medium, and large type developments. Small being the typical homeowner wanted to put in a wind energy type system to supplement the electricity to their home. So with that, what are the benefits? Clean energy, getting away from the energy independence of fossil fuels, and it is a different land use that's going to be coming in, and new revenues coming in for the rural owners on that. And I guess also to give a point, when you guys were in your breakout rooms and stuff, I was talking about NIPSCO, who's our power company over here with gas and electric. I sit on their citizen advisory panel for the Northwest area here, and they are shutting down fossil fuel plants. Down just south of us in Jasper County, Wheatfield Generating Station, they have 4 coal-fired generators, and they're getting rid of 2 of those. They're going to be decommissioning them by 2024, 2025 on that. So one of the things they were looking at, and they were asking the citizen advisory panel, is how do we go about getting a percentage of the electricity? So they were talking about solar, wind, and hydro. And so they put us through a little exercise, and then shortly after that, they came out with an RFP for private industries to come in and look at the putting in solar or wind energy systems, to give them proposals for that. I'm going to kind of go through the wind energy part, because I know solar is kind of more of a hotter topic in the state right now. So some of the things we were looking at with the wind energy zoning, where do we want to put them? What's the height? Shadow flicker, that's essentially when those blades go around, they will create a flicker of shadow down on the ground and everything like that. How does that affect people? There are medical studies on those items. So with that, looking at the ideal of the shadow flicker, what kind of setbacks do we have? So we address that within the ordinance. So where do we want them? Well, this is our zoning map right now. As you can see, Valparaiso is our county seat, right smack in the middle, everything. And State Road 2 kind of cuts diagonally through the county. So you're pretty much seeing all of our residential in yellow above, north of State Road 2. South of it is, majority of it is the agricultural land out there. Large parcels, not too many residential in that, or subdivisions. The 2 smaller areas in the bottom are the towns of Couts and Hebron. So we figured proper places, agriculture, general agriculture, and our prime agricultural. We don't have too many prime agricultural areas marked, just a few. It's mainly the Penny Purdue testing farm, or the farm they have out there on the east side of the county. Heavy industry and high intensity use districts. The reason why the I3 and the HI is that's where power plants can go into. Height, which is interesting, the wind charts that they have across Indiana, they're broken down into metrics. So they'll have a 50-meter height, a 75-meter height, and then a 100-meter height. We went as high as 500 feet. I was kind of shocked that our Plan Commission members did that. Most of those that you see in the White County and Benton County are 300 feet in height, but they said that the best wind in Porter County in that southern part is they need that height, the total height on it. They could get it, but in Porter County, but they're up on the lake and everything like that. With our environmental community in the national park up there, it's not a place to be putting these. So we did go up and accommodate them with a pretty good height on that. Particular company that did come in, should mention that they were looking and they were trying to obtain leases from all the rural property owners out there, the farmers out there, and they ended up leaving and putting the project totally on hold because they just weren't obtaining the leases that they needed for the development. Shadow flicker, I mentioned that. As you can see from the little diagram there, it does show the shadow on a house and everything. We wanted to make sure that we kept those away from the houses and the structures. So we did have setbacks. We did try to keep it so that we kept it off of the roads for a certain amount of time and everything. So that way it just didn't cause problems. Setbacks were big on that. We wanted to make sure that we kept them away from the schools on that, even though I do know there's a few schools that have those on their property. Wind energy tower and stuff like that. One of them is North Newton, not too far from here. So we looked at the ideal of how to keep these away from the road, also from the boundaries of subdivisions, or major subdivisions, or a school or a place of worship. We wanted them at least 3,000 feet away. So we made sure that shadow flicker was not an issue, any kind of noise on that. Regular minor subdivisions or little small housing groups out in the rural area, we kept it at 1,000 feet. Easements, yeah, there's going to be a number of easements that they purchase from the farmer and everything like that. Part of that is going to be the permanent easement that's going to be around, or I shouldn't say permanent, but the easement that's going to be around the tower after it's constructed. But there is going to be construction easements to get all of their property line or their power lines in for the construction of the actual tower and everything like that. Once you get the construction down, the construction easements will go away, or the temporary ones, and they'll just be more to the access easement and the easement that's around the actual tower itself. So duration, what we're finding is a lot of these with the wind and solar, the leasing agreements are usually going anywhere from 20 to 30 with options for 3 to 5 years. They do have payments on that. We did go on a little field trip when we were writing this, some of the Plan Commission members and I, down to White County or Benton County to talk to some of the landowners down there, and was set up through our Purdue Extension people here on that. So it was pretty interesting. I mean, they pay really quite well for the amount of the tower on that. And if they exceed their energy output, then they actually get into a profit sharing with the parcel owner on those. So a lot of those turbines you're seeing out there, I guess to give you an idea on that, our Bailey generating station up in Michigan City, 2 coal-fired generators. I was told by the NIPSCO representative, puts out about 460 megawatts of power. Most of those generators that you see down there in Benton and White County are now about, each one is about 1.5 megawatts of power output that they'll have. So, you know, if you do the math, you're looking at about 300 towers to be able to replace one of those generating stations like we have up in Michigan City. Some of the things they're going to do in first, they're going to be collecting all of the data. The very first thing is going to be a weather type tower and everything, so they can monitor the wind speeds and everything on that. And obviously they're going to have to get all of their lease agreements before they'll actually probably approach you on that. They'll approach you and let you know the intent. It's what happened with our solar. But once they get their lease agreements, they're going to be going. All right, solar energy. We just adopted this, year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. May not be that long, but here again, it was in reaction to solar companies looking out. When NIPSCO put out that RFP to look at private industries coming in and constructing these and partnering them with supplying the energy to the system, because of the fact that NIPSCO was starting to decommission some of their coal-fired generating stations. There was a lot of people knocking at the doors and everything. I probably spoke with 4 different solar companies some small, some large. We do have one that's large that's now starting to go. I can't really speak too much about that, unfortunately. But here again, what we did and what we developed was in reaction to these companies starting to come in on that. So start getting into a little bit of the details in this. We broke it down into two things: principal and accessory solar systems. Principal being the large solar farms that you see out there, and the accessory being the small systems that, as you can see on the little diagram, the solar panels are up on the roof, or the small freestanding out there that's might be supplying to a single structure or something in that. So we wanted to make sure that we covered both the principal and the accessory. We really didn't have anything dealing with the accessory on that, and we were coming in and having people wanting to do it. And the main thing we wanted to do is just, all right, where are you putting it? We looked at it, contain it on the roof, have an engineer tell us that your roof is strong enough to hold that system up, and give us an engineering report on that. All right, principal. It's permitted in agricultural and the industrial districts with the development plan approval from the Plan Commission. Here again, our zoning map, the green area is agricultural, the purple area, which you might see along the railroads and stuff, here outside of city of Valparaiso, it is allowed in that. Now, we did it as a development plan approval. A lot of places are going about and doing it as a special exception approval first in front of the BZA. Myself and the county attorney we talked about that, and it's just like, let's just flat out write out the development standards that they need to meet, and let's go forward. But have it at the Plan Commission for approval in front of it. We did say in the rural residential area, which is the light area, light yellow area, that they can do it, but there we have the special exception requirement in front of the BZA. Now, we felt that was important because we have those residential areas targeted for future growth. So we wanted to make sure that if somebody really wanted to come in there, it was going to be compatible with the growth that we felt with our comp plan going forward, or what kind of trends do we see going in there. So that way, you know, the BZA can shoot it down if our trends of growth are, it just wasn't going to be compatible within that. So, but in the agricultural and the industrial area, we kept it where it's just a development plan approval in front of the Plan Commission. And we wrote up the standards that they have to meet on that. As part of it, the conceptual plan, which we want to see essentially where these panels are going to be located as far as the right-of-ways, existing residential parcels that may be out there in the agricultural area, where are the drainage ways, what other easements are going to be in there. Obviously, if they're going to put one of these things, one of the things they're going to be really looking for is a high tower electrical line that they're going to be putting in. In this situation, the one we do have coming in and looking at it, there's one that's coming in right straight out of the Schaefer generating station, the NIPSCO station, that's going to be shutting down 2 of the 4 coal-fired generators. However, there's one thing I will mention to those that are in there that are looking at it. Find out what they're actually going to do it, because there's a national grid that's kind of interesting and a little mind-boggling in how this works. Not all of those high-powered tension lines that are running across the county and stuff are necessarily the local energy company. We found out in this particular area, there's one that's with Commonwealth Edison. Commonwealth Edison is Illinois. We also have some out-of-state companies in there, and that's also regulated by this federal group in here that looks at this, because they toss in the electrical that they generate into the system, and it goes into a national grid. So one of the things we learned when we were going about with the wind energy and everything like that, it's like NIPSCO may not be buying any of this power, but if they're creating 200 megawatts of power, 100 megawatts could be going to someplace in Virginia, and another 100 megawatts could be going up to New York, and it's all being dumped into this national grid system. So you might want to ask, where is this going? Is it going to the local power company, or is it going into the national grid to be sold elsewhere? So transportation plan is one of the things we wanted to do. We had it both with the wind and in the solar. They would have to work out, basically, we want letter of credits approved by the commissioners to cover our roads. We also want them to work with our highway engineer that's up here in my office here, and also our highway superintendent on an actual construction routes, so we know about it. Visual impacts, review possible landscaping that's submitted. Now, we did something a little bit different on this with the development plan that we have. Sure, differing land uses are supposed to provide buffers, mounding, and separation between the different uses. On this, we told them you can be exempt from that if you cover the ground with pollinators. I'll get into that in a little bit. But the Plan Commission could still sit there and say, okay, you know, there's a couple of houses right there, put in a little buffer on that. But we did work on a few things as far as alternatives on our landscaping. Construction estimate with jobs created and permanent jobs. That's going to become a little bit more important later, and I'll get a few other items. Power utilities commitment to purchase energy. That is in our ordinance and everything. And I know I debated with a couple of the companies on this and everything like that. And they said, well, we may not have it. I said, well, I'm assuming if you're going to be putting millions of dollars into a system here in the county that you do have some kind of commitment to purchase it. They said, yeah. So, I mean, I would work with them on that. Public safety, identify the potential hazards to adjacent properties. You know, we want to make sure we know who the manager of the place is when it's operational and during construction and everything, in case we need to contact anybody. Now, I mentioned the pollinators. Michiana Council of Governments, the South Bend area there and their Metropolitan Planning Organization wrote out an excellent piece of material on how to go about doing the pollinators on that. Here you can see a bunch of black-eyed Susans planted along the solar panels. We jumped on that. That's the part of the thing is if they plant this and everything, they can be exempt from other landscaping ordinances and with the buffer requirements, because this right here is going to add a lot of water quality benefits. It's going to help the ground a lot better on this here. And we took this out of the MACOG, some of the options on how to go about doing the plantings on this. So we put in a few options on that. I would suggest you know, you can see it in our ordinance, but you can also pick up that study that MACOG put out for this. But I mean, like I said, there's water quality benefits, there's infiltration because these are deep-rooted plants. It's really going to help our drainage system and our ditching system that we do have down in the rural areas. So one of the things we did do, we didn't copy MACOG's seed listing 100% from it. We, the county engineer and I sat down and talked about it. Our county engineer has also a master's in environmental engineering and everything. So he's very big in natural solutions for stormwater. So we went through the list and we did eliminate some of the more expensive, and we went with more of the native grasses in there, which would not be as costly as some of the pollinators. So we did do that with this. Accessory solar energy systems used by right in all zoning districts. single family and 2-family residential permitted up to 2,000 square feet. That's a lot. I know it is. You get into a subdivision, they're only going to be doing it on the roof and everything like that, because we still count the ground coverage. But you get into a 5-acre, 10-acre parcel out there in the county, and they want to put up to 2,000. I figured, why not? You're going to put some of the energy back into the grid system anyway, which, in my opinion, that's good. It helps out. So one of the things I also heard about it is debate where the State Planning Association, there was email discussions going back and forth. Well, some say regulated by the kilowatts, others say regulated by the square footage as far as the panels and everything. I just felt it was easier to do it by the panels with my administrative people working up front at the counter, and to help process this, so we stayed with the square footage versus trying to figure out the kilowatts. Right now, technology's changing. Right now, you need about 65 square feet to 67 square feet of panel to be able to create 1 kilowatt of energy. And in most of your generators, they have hooked out on the homes for emergency use, or 16 kilowatts. So, all right, here are some of the things with the layout and design must conform to industry standards, and there's a lot of industry standards out there. We found that out with the panels and stuff. We need to meet the side and rear setbacks for any accessory structure. We even have right-of-way setbacks and everything for the major large ones. So they're set back from the roads quite a ways. One of the things I know, some people also talk about fencing within their ordinances, and I saw that. I did not put fencing in the ordinance, and I spoke to the attorney about that. And because number one, we want them back from the right of way with the regular structure setback. But I kind of feel it's the solar company's decision on whether or not they want to put the fencing up there. It's their asset, and they want to protect it. So, we do have the ordinances on the type of fencing they can use. So I figured we'd just leave it that. The solar company could decide what they wanted to do. On that glare, the applicant has the burden to prove that and ensure that there is no glare. If there is a glare, and this is both in major or principal and accessory, that if there's any glare issues, we're going to be talking to them about that. This is accessories again. It has to be located on the primary structure. Total height can't exceed 18 inches above the roof peak. A wall mounted it has to observe the setbacks that we have. It can't extend past the walls on that, and meet all of the building codes that we do have. So one of the things I wanted to go back on with principal, since we're dealing with that. Right now I'm reviewing a decommissioning section. That we have the decommissioning proposal that's in from the company. Make sure you have decommissioning within your ordinance to discuss how you want that done. Ours simply states and everything like that. We need to be notified of when they stop generating power from that. And from that point, they have 12 months to start and complete the decommissioning and returning the land back to the way it was originally. So removal of the panels, removal of the batteries, removal of any power lines, any of the gravel access roads on that. We do require a bond for that, or letter of credit on that. And we also state in there, if they don't complete it in the 12 months as we did, we will take them in front of the hearing officer that we have here to enforce it. And also, if need be, we go in and do the decommissioning ourselves, and then we can put a lien on the property. Second thing I would also recommend going in is what I mentioned earlier about the use of the highways, that you have you get your highway engineer and highway superintendent involved to understand the construction traffic, the intent, work out a plan on how they're going to access off of that. Make sure you get a letter of credit and everything with your commissioners or council to set in place to cover your roads on that. So those two things are in the ordinance that we have. One thing I did notice in a lot of the ordinances is they have a what I want to say, a economic development package on that. We did not put that in the ordinance, mainly because we know they're coming in for a tax abatement on that. That's where we're going to actually sit down and start working out issues with an economic development ordinance or economic development benefits with that. They'll discuss it with you if you get that far. One of the things we also learned on that is if they're going in for tax abatement, and they will continue it because they did pass a state law this past session on the assessment of solar farms. And I don't know if the solar industry is all that happy still with the procedure for the assessment. I don't think they think it's low enough, but anyway, they're still going to come in for the tax abatement on that. One of the things we flat out asked them, it's like, okay, we're going to hire a financial company to work through this with us to give us the numbers. And we're also going to hire an attorney, in which we did do down in out of Indianapolis, to help us get us through all of these processes. And then we looked at them and said, you will pay for it. And they agreed. So consider that an economic development plan, everything like that. If you need to go out and hire outside people, financial or attorneys to go for it, just flat out ask them, you know, you want them to pay these. They will, if they're really interested in getting it. So that is part of it. They do want to be a good partner. And then they did talk about some of the items that they would, and some of the payments that they would make and everything. And we also told them to reach out to the schools in this area. So our Ivy Tech, our Valparaiso University, and even the high schools. So they're doing that as we speak. So those are some of the things, you know, I don't have my email address out there, but I guess if you need it or you'd like to contact me, I can talk to you individually if you would like about this. So at that, if anybody has any questions.
I did want to ask a question, Bob.
Yeah.
What's the most common objection you got from the general public regarding the wind farm proposals? One reason I hear that other property owners surrounding the wind turbine don't want it built is that it's going to lower their property value. Have you seen any evidence of that?
Wind energy never did end up getting built. One of the things is they couldn't get their leases. Now talking to the one farmer down in White County about the profit sharing they had, it was like $10,000 a tower plus profit sharing on top of it. So I mean, they pay very well out there. I haven't heard anything about property values. We do have two small solar farms that came in. It was sort of a grant type situation where they came in and two different spots, built a solar farm that could put in 1 megawatt of power into the NIPSCO situation. And we did hear a lot of people complaining, oh, it's going to, you know, the noise from it. It's like, really? There's not too much noise. They generally position the generators or the batteries in the middle of the field away from the areas. On that, we also heard about the noise of hail hitting it. And I had to ask the question, so you do stand outside in a hailstorm? But it ended up going in on it, and we did have a lot of remonstrance on it. But I don't see where it lowered any values. Matter of fact, one of them's right next to the city of Portage, and they're building all around it. Yeah, they're building a lot around it. So it wouldn't be surprised if Portage ends up annexing that particular area. But to give you an idea, 1 megawatt of energy from a solar farm, they'll need at least 6 to 7 acres to be able to produce that.
Thank you.
I did have a question. You had mentioned potential hazards to adjacent property owners. My question is besides the visual and the construction period, are there a potential of any hazards to an adjacent property owner based on a solar field system that goes in? Because we are getting a lot of those types of concerns in our office.
You know, I heard the leaching from the panels and stuff like that, and I don't know. I guess my only real concern would be the batteries, and I would assume that those batteries will be encased into a system that will contain them. I guess that's one thing you can definitely check for sure. That, and just make sure your emergency management people in that area know exactly where this is at, who they contact, and how they can access it if there's anything that's going on. Visuals, I don't know. I mean, I heard that, but I think the pollinators and some of those things that you see in some of those examples that I've given, I think it looks really quite nice. Plus, it's a benefit to the land for the water quality in the area.
So we did because of a site that's coming into us, they suggested for us to go visit one, which I did not too long ago. I actually sent the email link to Ann. If you have an opportunity, maybe she can share it with you. It, to me, was considerably, it had a high-pitched noise that we could still hear 300 feet away. And I didn't know if that site was malfunctioning or if that is common, that where those inverters are coming together, if a neighboring parcel is going to hear this noise.
Ask him to position it, definitely. Because most everywhere, like I've seen the small ones that they have, I have not heard any complaints from that small 6-7 acre farm that is next to some residential. Not one complaint on that. Yes, are you going to hear noise? The wind turbines that we went and visited and everything like that, we stood at the road and everything like that with the wind turbines. We didn't hear anything until we got up close, and then we heard the hum from the generators in there inside the tower. The main thing we felt from the wind turbines was that just the thump of the blade going around and affecting the wind and everything on that. So, but as far as the noise, no. You can ask them, just work with them to make sure that the batteries and the generators are away from any kind of residence.
Bob, we had one question earlier when you were finishing up the wind farm portion. Do you know if the lease agreements are for the entire parcel of that ground, or if it's just for the, I assume what she meant is just for the windmill portion of that? Do you know how that works?
Wind energy ones, usually it's an access road that goes back, and then the area around the tower. As you can see, many farmers are planting really up right close to the towers itself. I'm sure there's an agreement that there's a certain area that they cannot encroach upon. Obviously the access road, but you're seeing crops right up next to those towers. So Solar farms, I haven't seen it, but I've been told certain crops have been grown in the areas where the solar farms are. I haven't seen an example of that yet.
Thank you, Bob. If anyone has any further questions, I'm going to move on to our second presentation here, but Bob will stick around. We're going to have time for questions at the end as well. So I will have Bob stop sharing and I will invite Kara to begin her presentation. And hers is going to be on natural resources. And if Kara, if you have any insight on the renewable energy, we welcome you to share that as well.
We will have a lot more information in the fall. So I'm working with a colleague, Tamara Ogle, to inventory statewide ordinances for renewable energy, particularly wind and solar. So we're creating a database. We're also looking for some common themes to provide some guidance and practices for communities. So it can further be a resource to help be proactive in your planning. This is mirroring a combined animal feeding operation study that we did a few years ago. And so on our Purdue land use team website, you can see that CFO study. And so our renewable energy study will be similar to that. We'll have some fact sheets and some different information to help with that as well. And all of that information is going to be shared during our land use summit that I'll share at the end of this presentation too. So we'll have more information soon. It's the long-winded answer to that. Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. All right, hopefully you can see my presentation slides okay now. Are you seeing just the slide?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So yes, you do get to listen into me for a little bit longer. Thanks, Anne, for having me tonight too. So the work that I do across the state in environmental planning is focused predominantly on collaborative environmental planning, which is the framework that's been in use for quite a long time now and has become more of the predominant way that people are tackling and thinking through environmental issues. But as we know, guiding and managing land use is challenging because there are all these different competing interests, values, and uses, as we just learned more about with wind and solar is a great example. And so this image too that I'm showing here is a very common image throughout Indiana. This is from a series of aerial flyovers in the northern part of the state. But as you're looking through this, you can see at least 4 or 5 different types of competing types of land use within this image. So what I'm going to focus on with this presentation is, as Anne mentioned, she found from the group that you're interested in some different types of public engagement aspects. And so I'm going to start with some collaborative planning frameworks that we use in the extension programming that I'm involved with to guide local environmental planning. I'll crosswalk just very briefly. This is a very short presentation. I'll just crosswalk briefly with comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, and sub-control ordinances, and then leave you with a few more tools and resources. So hopefully that'll give you some more tools in your toolkits for environmental planning thoughts. I'm also doing some additional statewide work in how communities are or are not working in environmental planning from a collaborative sense, and lots of groups are, but they're I'm hearing and learning about in the data that I'm getting into the analysis with is that groups want more help and they want more resources for education, and that we still have some work to do in our state, which is definitely shown through this slide here. So this is from one of the more recent rankings for the U.S. News and World Report and their best states rankings. And one of their categories is in the natural environment. Indiana ranked 48 so out of 50. And we were ranked 38th in air and water quality and 48 in pollution, based on the other states as well. And so you can go to this website and learn more about their metrics and how they're compiling this information. So the take home here is that yes, we still have some work to do. We do have a lot of great resources within our state, and people definitely care about seeing the conservation as well. So we're going to talk a little bit more about a community engagement framework. And I think, as I mentioned too, I'm a planner focusing on environmental planning. I also am a community development professional too. So the lens that I have is using asset-based community development in addition to planning and planning processes. So how these are different and how they are similar between planning and community development is within community development, there's a little bit more emphasis on community organizing and engagement. So getting groups together, diversity of groups, to work in things like working groups and focus groups and listening sessions to do a lot of feedback and engagement in the planning process. And that is a lot of the focus of the work that I do. When we're using asset-based community development frameworks too, we're looking still at the long-term planning, focusing also on local assets, resource limits, and those environmental issues that the community wants to address. Focusing a lot on data collection analysis, so both primary and secondary data, working, and that's social science, working with surveys and other tools to talk to people about what they want to see and what they're doing, and also looking at trends and where different indicators are for environmental improvements. And finally, implementation and evaluation is a part of it, both from the work that I'm doing with groups and we want to assess how we are and improve, but also supporting communities and how they can evaluate their implementation and if what they're working on is working and making a difference. And I'll talk through a little bit about how we do this. And I have a series of different kinds of agendas and different things that we work on in a whole series of patchwork of things. But the overarching aspect to this is creating a lot of different engagement opportunities to encourage diverse stakeholder participation. We start with, before doing this process, it really does start with scoping with the community and talking more about leadership and some of the key stakeholder groups and what the outcomes and goals are for doing a collaborative process. It may be that you're working on a comprehensive plan update or a Parks and Recreation master plan, and you want to get more groups involved. It could be that there's a parcel of land or a downtown redevelopment. So we're looking for that both top down and bottom up aspects for collaboration and collaborative planning in particular, so that key decision makers are invested in the process, that they want to work with stakeholders and residents in ways that are meaningful, so that they can help to incorporate some of that decision making too. And so to do that, we conduct a series of community visioning. So that can be short workshops and lots of brainstorming. It can be some other surveys and focus groups too. We also use a lot of working group sessions. So we will have, for example, for working on an element of a comprehensive plan for natural resources and land use, then we will have working groups established for the different sections of that. And we'll go through additional data and make decisions to present them back to, in addition to the leadership team. We also coach through setting the goals, objectives, and strategies, so that at the end of this process, there's a workable document that can be incorporated to the planning process that we've set up to support. First, as I mentioned, either a comprehensive plan, parks plan, or another type of plan. This looks familiar because we've just spoken about it too in the previous presentation, but we do overlay this participation spectrum with the different types of meetings and the goals of the group, so that we have a back and forth conversation. So if you want public involvement, resident involvement, at what level are you able to work with the public, and also what are you able to do with the feedback that you receive and as part of your planning process. And that is very much helps to form the type of meetings that are created, the types of tools that we use, and how data then is presented within this process. I'll introduce a couple of different their frameworks, their tools, a couple of different things that I use to help with diverse and inclusive engagement. One of the things is this community capitals framework, and this is a community development framework. You can see the citation at the bottom. This is really helpful when you're thinking through different aspects or lenses of a community. And even when creating a stakeholder group or bringing people together for feedback, if you use this as a guide, you will bring together very diverse perspectives if you're populating based on financial, built, natural, cultural, human, social, and political capitals. The idea here is that each of these capitals have assets that they represent. And this is also a nice framework to use for things like feedback and visioning. This is an example of what we do online when we would be doing them in person. In the very small corner, you can see the sticky walls that we've used in different types of community engagement sessions. But as we've been transitioning online, you can get a lot of great feedback based on these different community capitals categories. And again, the diversity of kind of pushing outside of the norm really helps when you have something to guide a group and guide in gathering feedback. Another thing that is very useful is the appreciative inquiry process. And this is used to design facilitation and to design the types of meetings. You can find a lot of information and tools on how to apply appreciative inquiry. It's out in all kinds of ways on the internet and literature. And you can see another citation there from something that I find is useful. But what this does is rather than focusing on deficits, although we are addressing issues and we are addressing needs in the community, we are focusing on what the community has as assets and core pieces to build on. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're defining on what that focus is. So you need to have a framework of how you're planning or what you're planning for. You're recognizing and appreciating these community assets. You're going through a visioning process, a design process. What does implementation look like? And then evaluation and continuing through that loop. How this is useful is that we're appreciating or doing an asset-based aspect so that you can move forward a little more quickly in finding some of the solutions. Once you, because you have agreed on what your focus is and what the issues are, then you can start focusing on those solutions as well. I'll pivot a little bit here too. So I wanted to kind of start with that framework because when that's what we use then to work with communities to address some of the planning issues and things that they're working on. And commonly, we're supporting communities with comprehensive plan updates and specific elements. But one of the, when you're thinking through environmental, natural resources aspects, one of the very basic things that's very helpful in focusing on natural resources is conducting an inventory and making sure that you have an independent element within your plan. And it could be embedded within other elements too. But what we found in looking at community plans throughout the state is that when it's specifically focused on natural resources and environmental planning, that you then have a better chance of the mechanism to make changes that you'd like to see. There's an example here, and it's one of the ones that we pulled out because it is very clear of a natural resource inventory that's linked to a policy to affect land use. And so For example, Monroe County has an inventory of natural resources and their characteristics. They clearly identified strategies, and then they have clearly defined zoning ordinances that are linked to those strategies. So yes, that's certainly a best practice, but when doing that in the context of environment and natural resources, it can be a very powerful tool, and something that, because we don't have as many requirements on environmental planning, it's implemented in very different ways across the state. This is one way that can make a difference. This is an example of an inventory that the team I work with will compile. So we, going through the different visioning and other more qualitative pieces of a community engagement process, we also have those data, maps, and graphs that we've generated through several different sources. And so that's all compiled into these reports, and we have action schedules and the different pieces that are tied to that. So an inventory is another tool that's helpful in the environmental planning process. We also focus too on the future land use maps because these are regulating land use through zoning and subdivision control ordinances. And I'll talk a little bit about those too. Again, just touching the surface. So what this can look like too, and how zoning can impact an example of natural resources and environmental consideration is thinking through, excuse me, a zoning requirement. So in this short example, if we change the parking rules by offering incentives in a planned unit development process, we can step through what that would look like. So we have a big box kind of store here, large parking lot, and there's one space per 2,000 square feet of retail. So if we change the rules by having 10% reduction for on-site transit access and 10% for bicycle trail access, what does that do? What kind of impact do we have? And of course, there are certainly other ideas and other things we can think about. But if you start to reduce those spaces, you reduce from around 1,200, you get down to 940. And start taking those out, you start to see some of the benefits in stormwater runoff too. You add green infrastructure into this, and then you have even more environmental benefits as well. So you can see the gallons of runoff that are impacted by changing some of the impacts of zoning and providing some of these incentives. And similarly, thinking through the subdivision control ordinance, because these are providing standards for streets, gutters, sidewalks, and space for infrastructure. Many of these will already have conservation of naturally sensitive lands or other types of landscaping considerations, particularly in a subdivision like this. You would have things like the number of shrubs or types of tree species, which you also can have great impact by looking at what your tree species requirements are within your municipalities and counties too. So we can see the impact of runoff within. This was the original stream here. It's been channelized, and we have the changes that have occurred. And now we have more impervious pavements, and so we have this much stormwater per a rain event. One of the tools too to think about this are incorporating some additional considerations using conservation design subdivisions, which are very similar, but are clustering developments within certain areas so that you're preserving more of the sensitive spaces or having more open space. We do have some examples within the state. Hendricks County is one of them, and there are certainly others. But these can be tied to subdivision control as well. I'll talk a little bit now too about the tools, the planning tools and different features. One of the programs that I work with is called Tipping Point Planner. This is in land use environmental planning decision support system. We have several different tools and features embedded within this tool. This link here has different scales that you can look at, but we do have these county planning dashboards, and we have printouts for each county within our state, as well as all the other states within the Great Lakes region. And so you can get some baseline information about your county and natural resources. You can also look at land use change, and you can calculate some of the impacts with future land use as well. And so we do have a short course that's free and online that if you'd like to take that to see how it works and learn more about it, or you can just go to the planner directly and you're welcome to use any of those tools as well. Additionally, there are several portals there are lots and lots of tools and resources out there for natural resources and planning. Some of the portals that I really like that have access to a lot of other tools are listed here. So the American Planning Association, Environment, Natural Resources, and Energy has a series of pieces here. And they also have some background information. This part is free. You don't have to be a member to get into many of these resources. The NOAA Digital Coast, if you particularly search more for Great Lakes, you can find things that are applicable statewide as well. And so that's also a great portal to look through. And one of the ones that I'm really enjoying right now is the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. They have case studies, they have tools, they have different ways to look at environmental data. So that's been really helpful. These are focused more on doing resilience planning, but there's a lot of overlap in other types of environmental planning too. I'll have just a couple of other things that I'll show you and then we'll wrap up too. I work with the Indiana Land Resources Council through the State Department of Agriculture. And in collaboration with that group, the Purdue Land Use team created this guidance document in 2019 for community planning for ag and natural resources. We have multiple overview guidance documents and education and training resources in this document series, and you can find that information at the website here. So you can certainly find more topics of interest to support your work. We also hope that you'll save the date for the Land Use Summit on September 8th and 9th. We're going to have a very strong emphasis on climate change planning and renewable energy planning. This Land Use Summit is has a very similar audience to the Citizen Planner audience. So Plan Commission members, local government staff who are working in planning. We do have special emphasis on ag and natural resources as well. So we will also have some innovations in environmental planning and community engagement as part of our sessions. The registration is not open yet. And so finally, if we do have a little bit of time for conversations, but it'd be good to hear some local examples or ideas of how some collaborative environmental planning is occurring in your communities. And we can certainly talk about other things as well. But my contact information is here, and I'll be happy to take questions, or of course, if you have questions for Bob or others, open it up for however you'd like to use the rest of the time, Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara, and thank you, Bob. I am just going to open up the lines. Anybody that wants to unmute and throw out a question, that's what the rest of this time is for. So anything from anyone. I have a question for you, Bob. When you were drafting this solar ordinance, how did you get public input?
We advertised it. We put it on, obviously, the webpage. We got into the newspapers. We talked about going forward with this. and the mention of the solar companies looking around and everything. To be honest with you, when we had the reading of the ordinance, no one was there. When they find one coming out in this south part of the county, yeah, they're probably going to start asking questions, but we are going to do a lot of reach out and education. We told the one company that they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to hold little separate public community meetings to answer questions that they have with their development on that. But I mean, we tried to get it out in the newspapers. We had it up on our website, Facebook pages. No one showed up.
Interesting.
Which, yeah, they show up when the actual development starts in.
Yeah. I have a question for you. You talked about your pollinator mix and you kind of that whole thing, and that kind of dealt again with natural resources. You talked about the water quality benefits. Did you have a native plant requirement? I saw you listed some, but I didn't get enough time to look through if those were natives that you were encouraging or.
Yes, they were natives.
Okay.
We took the basically the seed list from, hold on a second, maintenance is vacuuming. We took a seed mix and varieties that they have at, if you know the company, Cardinal, used to be JF New.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a lot of restorations, whether it's wetlands or prairie or whatnot. And we took a seed list that they have from their native planting. So like the grasses, you'll see little blue stem, big blue stem, they're native.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, you used this the solar energy group coming in to allow them to almost pay for some natural resources restoration, almost in a way.
Yes, yes. We figured, if those lease agreements are good for 20, 25 years and they decide to decommission that, when they leave, the soil is going to be better than what it was when it came in.
Yeah.
Is the way what myself and the county engineer are looking at it.
Have any provisions in there on either side of it if they were to remove large areas of trees or anything along that line, wetlands or anything?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I can't hear you either, Teresa. Can you get just a little closer?
I can yell at you. I have no problem doing that. Did you have any provisions in there if they were to remove large areas of forestry or already planted trees or wetlands or anything along that line?
We did when it came with our regulated drain system and our drainage ways on that they had to be out of the easements or they have to work with our stormwater management board and regulated drain. Wetlands, if they want to do the work in the wetlands, I mean, all of our ordinances kick in and just say you're going to have to go to Army Corps item, get your permits on that. We have one down south that's looking at being in the floodplains, and it's like, you're going to have to do some studies. It's just the way it is. So, and they probably are going to avoid those areas. Insurance companies get nervous when they're talking about running electrical lines underground near wet areas. So.
Any other questions for Kara or Bob? All right, we are very close to 8 o'clock. So I'll just wrap this up. I encourage you guys to finish your course if you're able. Thank you guys for attending. If you have any questions for Kara or Bob, they have both offered to be available for questions. So you can find, I think Kara shared her information. Bob's is on the Porter County website, I believe.
Yes.
So if you need that, you can go there, or you can reach out to me as well. So with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you again for attending, and have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.